Hey, friends. Welcome to the Divorce Clarity Studio on WGSN-DB Going Solo Network Radio, Podcasts, and TV. I'm your host, Lisa Lisser, CEO and founder of LZL Coaching, a boutique coaching firm focused on divorce, relationships, and life transitions. I am so glad you joined us today. On the Divorce Clarity Studio, our goal is to offer clear information, grounded education, and soul-centered guidance to help you understand the divorce process from start to finish. We share advice that helps you separate the emotions of divorce from the business of divorce. And my guests raise up stories that let you feel seen, give you the inspiration to move forward, and foster the courage to stand on your own 2 feet. Ultimately, the Divorce Clarity Studio is here to help you feel less alone, more informed, and more aligned with your values. Today, I am excited to welcome my friend Lorraine Connell. Lorraine is a distinguished expert, a TEDx speaker, and an author in teen leadership coaching. She has over 2 decades of experience in education and leadership development. As the founder and owner of Peers Not Fears, she specializes in nurturing leadership skills in high school students through intentional research-based programs. Lorraine challenges the traditional notion that leaders are born, emphasizing the importance of practice, resilience, and intentional growth. Her programs integrate social emotional learning, and they create inclusive, empowering environments that foster personal and professional development. She is dedicated to continuous learning and inclusivity, ensuring that all students, regardless of background, have the opportunity to lead and succeed. Welcome, Lorraine.
Oh, Lisa, thank you so much. I love listening to my bio and remembering wow, I've done a lot of things. So I appreciate it.
I love that because you know what? There is something powerful about hearing who you are because we forget, our lives have taken many steps and journeys, but we actually did stuff, and that's powerful.
It really is.
So, I was reading this bio and it made me think about your TEDx talk because you actually didn't put that in your bio. And
you're right.
Right. And so what it did for me was I noticed it, I saw it absent, and then I just rewatched the TEDx talk. And it is so amazing and inspiring. And I promise we're going to talk about it. But first, I always start at the beginning. And Lorraine, tell us your story. When in your life did your interest in teen leadership begin? And what got you into this work?
Well, honestly, it probably harkens back to when I was a teen myself and was that rule following, quiet, average student that did everything I could to stay in the average zone because being average meant I wasn't going to fail or be the worst at anything. And so I think that's what started me on this path, but it wasn't until I was much, much later. I was a parent and I was a teacher, and this average nature sort of started to impact me because it was reflecting in the students that I was working with. So I taught chemistry, which is a pretty challenging class. And I would encounter kids who would say, I don't know how, I can't do that. And so it was so much of those words and those feelings were being reflected to me from my own experience as a teenager. And then came something that happened during the pandemic where I got in trouble. And again, still that rule follower,
Right.
Getting in trouble sent me into a tailspin. And what got me in trouble was a student who I had labeled a leader in what I was working on at the time was called a peer leadership program at a high school where juniors and seniors were earning leadership credit and working with freshmen. And this student leader was maybe like below average in terms of academics, in terms of behavior, not bad, but not like high achieving, not rule following. And she asked a question that challenged someone, and I got in trouble. And I was like, what? Why did I get in trouble? And why is what this student did a problem? And so that started me on this journey of examining my own challenges of
Mm.
allowing students to make mistakes and how they might impact me, and lifting more students up who weren't the norm of who we might identify leaders.
Wow. So that's big because, you know, having been a rule follower and still pretty much I follow the rules.
Right.
It's really hard to process what it's like when you think you're like putting people in a lane and
Mhm.
they step out of it. And now is it my responsibility because I put them in that lane and they didn't stay there? Is it their responsibility? And like, who's the leader in the room? And who's calling out behavior as outside the lines? Who's
Yeah.
drawing the lines?
Right. Right. And that was the piece that I couldn't reconcile, was like, what message was I sending? What fears was holding me back in empowering more students? And so it was like this long journey. It didn't happen overnight. I would say, like, even looking back as a teenager and really wanting somebody to see me and say, "Hey, Lorraine, I think you could maybe do this." And that just never happened. And so I didn't see myself as a leader. Even when I left teaching and opened my business of Peers Not Fears, I was still really struggling with calling myself a leader because, and this is what comes up for a lot of teens, is I don't actually know what your definition of leadership is. And
Mm,
if it doesn't match mine, then I can't really become a leader for you, because I might make a mistake. I might not follow the rules. And that was sort of the real challenge. And so what really was that moment for me was deciding that if I couldn't embrace calling myself a leader, then how could I expect any teenager to call themselves a leader either?
yeah, there is so much in there because we hold ourselves back
Yes.
from really experiencing the full nature of what we are capable of so often. And
Yes.
part of it is because we're staying in the lines and we are listening to labels that have been placed on us by other people based on our behavior, and how we internalize those labels is really significant. And that's what I'm hearing from you.
Yes.
Now,
Yes.
I had an experience where I was labeled a leader, like from fourth grade social student council, right? I was on the student council, and
Mhm.
that's the first thing. And yet I never became president because other things took my mind and other things were interesting to me. But what we forget is that those were actually choices,
Mm.
right? I made a choice to take a different route. And that was within my power. And so I was actually leading my life, but
Yes.
I wasn't following a path that someone else had drawn.
Yeah. Well, and I ask a lot of times, I'll ask my teenagers, I'll ask parents, I'll ask anybody that I'm in a room with, and I will say, what is the one requirement that needs to be in place for you to be a leader? And I will get a ton of variety, right? Confidence, public speaking, being able to make good decisions, problem solving, right? Like this gambit of things. But if I ask you, no, 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 there's only one. So pick the one that's most important. We can't, because they all seem so important.
Right.
And so it's about acknowledging that everything that we list as requirements are actually skills. There's
Yeah.
only one requirement, and the requirement is making a decision. Now, we will deem many decisions as good or bad, right and wrong, but really there is no binary. It's somewhere in the middle. And
Mm,
the learning those skills that we've identified as the requirements of leadership is what we learn through those decision making. And so that for me was mic drop, right? Like when I realized that everything else was a skill, and in skills you can practice and get better at,
mhm.
it didn't mean I needed all of those requirements that I thought. I just had to make a decision. And I make, the number is like 30,000 decisions every day. So, like, I love then turning it around and being like, so that means we're all leaders already. Now, do we want to develop the skills to make us better leaders? Right. And so that sort of nuance and recognition allows most of the teens that I work with to take a beat and say, oh, okay, so I don't have to be perfect. I don't have to be all of those things. I can start where I am and get higher or get better.
Right. Right. I mean, it's so um, scary and empowering at the same
Mm-hmm.
time because you said decision, like the thing that requires you, that creates a leader is a decision to
Right.
go forward. And and that's making me think of Brene Brown's talking about Theodore Roosevelt's being the one in the arena. Like
Mm-hmm.
you have
Yeah.
to be in it
Yes.
and actually choosing to enter a space that you're worried about, that you don't think that you stand out, that you don't know if your voice is going to be heard. Taking the risk is what makes you a leader. And sometimes you could take it with confidence, and sometimes you can take it with trepidation.
Mm-hmm.
You're afraid.
And sometimes you can do it alone, and sometimes you can bring a team in with you, and
Yeah,
so you don't have to do it alone. And so it's like all of those little things are the learning that comes by acknowledging that the leadership is in the decision making.
right. And the leadership is embedded in the person because
Mhm.
every decision you make guides you on in a certain direction.
Right.
You
Right.
know? And so um, one of the things that I think about a lot in my work with people going through divorce
Yeah.
is, the fear and the overwhelm and the experience of life has happened to me and I had no agency.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so when you're talking about kids, how do you get them to realize that they do have agency to guide their life and their journey?
I think it comes back to reducing and removing the idea that there's either a right decision or a wrong decision. So many juniors in high school, they're about 16, right? There's so many really life-changing
Yeah.
decisions that happen at this age. Like getting your license means you're making life and death decisions every time you get behind the wheel. And if I'm constantly in fear of making the wrong decision, because if it's not right, it's wrong, then I'm going to be stuck in this indecision mode, which, is a decision of its own,
Yeah.
but I don't have the agency anymore, right? Life is happening to me when I'm not in control of making the decision. And I relinquish my control of making a decision when I'm so fearful that the decision is going to be wrong.
Right.
And I want to acknowledge that there is no decision that you will ever make that is completely wrong, because if you can then reflect, or you can think about how else you might have made that decision, that quote unquote wrong decision is preparing you for making that next decision using that evidence, using that reflection. And so I work so strongly to get students and teens before they turn 16,
Mm,
because if they don't have that ability to understand that decision making isn't wrong, if it isn't right, that they become really paralyzed, or they stop making their own decisions and just do what anyone tells them to do.
yeah. Yeah. And that's you're really susceptible to that when you're in middle school and high school, like
Yes.
especially high school. Like it's
Right.
so much more comfortable to be part of a group than to
Yes.
stand on your own. And
Yes.
you build friendships, and creating friendships is a leadership skill.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
but just following and not making your own decisions is what we want to inspire our students, and for me, my audience of people who are making really monumental decisions for their lives when they
Right.
decide when to divorce, whether to divorce, what are their money issues, what about their kids? Like these are big decisions. And if you become paralyzed because
Mm-hmm.
you feel like every decision is the most important thing and it's either win or lose,
Yeah.
you're going to stay stuck.
Right. Right. There's nothing worse than being in a really big decision moment and just standing there not making a yes or a no or something in between because you're so fearful of the results, right?
Right.
You can't predict the results. Even as much as we think we can't actually predict what the results are going to be until we make the decision
Right.
and the results are revealed to us. And I think very much of the work that I'm doing with teens relates directly to the decisions that are being made in divorce situations because they feel so life and death. And I am not going to reduce the decisions to say they are not life and death, but they are decisions, right? And you
Yeah.
can't go in any direction if you're not willing to take a step in those directions. And so
Right.
I guess I want to reflect back to you, how do you help your clients who are facing that indecision to take that baby step?
Right. So that's exactly how I work, is that
Mhm.
these are baby steps. No decision is so far that you can't walk a few steps back. And
Mm.
I share that there isn't winning or losing. It's
Ah.
winning and learning.
Mhm.
Because as you shared in your TED Talk, like you made a mistake and something you acknowledge was a mistake. But instead of sitting there and ruminating, which might have happened for a little while, but instead of making that the definition of, oh, look what I did wrong, you looked at, okay, how can I shift and make a different decision?
Mhm.
So for my clients, I say, just start moving.
Yeah.
And, I was writing an article and it was like, what's one small step you can take when it all seems so big?
Yeah.
And I came upon the idea, what about opening your own checking account? Right? It's actually not hard to do. You have some money to deposit, you walk into the bank, you meet the greeter, you tell her what you want to do, and then you go and sit with the bank employee and you open your account. So the steps aren't hard, but the idea that you are taking control of your financial future seems monumental.
Yes. Yes.
And so I tried to break it into the small steps so that people see that you can always reevaluate and reassess.
Mm.
I mean, you want to make sure that you're getting what you need when you sign an agreement, because when you sign an agreement, you're pretty well set. But all of those, there are so many steps before you get there.
Yeah.
And so that's what I share with them, is that you're not moving out of the house tomorrow just because they said they wanted a divorce. So let's breathe for a few minutes and make
Mhm.
a plan.
Yeah. With
And then
just one little step
with one
as our
little
first
step,
step. Right.
right.
Yeah.
If it means, getting the Street Easy app, which is like in New York City, the kids use that app to find apartments, and you just open it and you start looking. And that's all you have to do. That's the
Right.
beginning. That's the first step in your creating a new habit and a habit of agency.
Yes.
So let me actually, we're at 19 minutes. So it's time for us to take a quick break.
Sounds good.
We'll be back in 30 seconds with Lorraine Connell. See you soon. we're back with Lorraine Connell, author, educator, TEDx speaker, and great friend. So, so let's keep going with how do we grow leadership. So, learning how to do it when you're a teen is incredible because it sets you up for decision making throughout your life. But you really can develop these leadership skills anytime. So, I'm going to ask you about your TED Talk because in your TED Talk, you opened with you made a decision about a student, we'll call her Sarah.
Yeah.
And you had a judgment and didn't welcome her into the program because you thought she wasn't right. So tell us more about that story.
Yeah. And I used Sarah as a pseudonym, but really it's because that story was played many, many times throughout my teaching career where a student would behave, a student would say, a student would decide, and I would make a judgment based on that one thing. And so in that experience, that student was more like class clowny or social, right? And I decided that, I couldn't trust Sarah. And really what it came down to was that I didn't trust myself to let students make decisions. And it comes back to that same like getting in trouble fear of if I didn't control everything, including what students did or was part of my group, then I couldn't be in control of the outcome. And it was that short-sightedness of I was giving any student a leadership opportunity when in reality, I was leading everything and giving them no chance to learn or make a mistake. And if they did, it was death to them, right? Like that, I would no, I'm not going to take that risk again. And so it really came down to my own ability to be uncomfortable, my own ability to be okay making a mistake. And that took me a really long time.
So there's so much in there. I love this idea that courage is being okay with feeling uncomfortable. So often in divorce, we know what we know and the future is unknown, and that's what's uncomfortable. So we may be very uncomfortable where we are and the way things are, but leaving that comfort zone is terrifying. So from what you just described, it's like there were rules of the game, there were behaviors that had to be followed, and when they weren't or when they didn't match a certain label, then they were out. And it was a one and done kind of thing. I mean, it could have been a pattern of behavior, like that happens, but we have this preconceived idea of who is a leader.
Yes.
And, the ones with the most confidence or who show up looking like they have the most confidence may not be the true leaders in the group.
And often they're not, because they're just as much of a rule follower and or a purveyor of that I follow the rules. Oftentimes I'll find kids who are deemed a leader by title have no ability to navigate challenges, have no ability to navigate failure or mistakes themselves. And so they will put on the perfect facade of being that they have it all together, right? Which then perpetuates this belief that leaders are perfect and leaders make no mistakes. And really what ends up happening is if I make a mistake and I have a leadership title, I know there's a lot at risk. So I'm going to deflect, I'm going to blame, I'm going to hide, and I'm going to do everything in my own power to prevent that mistake coming back on me. And so when we get these high flying students who make a monumental mistake that they cannot hide, their whole world comes crumbling down. And that's the alternative to not trying and learning to be uncomfortable with even little mistakes, right?
Yeah.
I think about that checking account that we're trying to open, right? And so I go in, I sign all the papers, and I realize that there's a fee that's associated with it, right? And so now I'm uncomfortable. I'm not going to say anything because I don't have, I don't have the confidence in trying to like talk about it. And so I live with the fact that I have a fee because I'm embarrassed that I made that decision, right? And
Mhm.
all it would take for me is to go back in and say, "I'd like a different account," right? And
Yeah.
but that feels too scary because I haven't built the muscle of learning how to be uncomfortable with making a mistake, and that's what I see with my students. And so leading into that fear of making mistakes is why I play games, because when you're playing a game, the mistake of getting caught or the mistake of like breaking a rule is so inconsequential,
Mhm.
and the game just keeps going. Or in my experience, when I'm doing a more like challenging and outcome based game, they get to try again. And so we're
Mhm.
starting to see that mistakes are actually teaching an awful lot. So we don't make that mistake again and we can get further in the game because now we know we can't go that way.
Yeah. I mean, that is so huge.
Mhm.
Um, in today's environment, our society, we have gotten to a point where we don't want our kids to feel any discomfort,
Right.
right? We want everybody gets a trophy. It doesn't matter who won or lost the Little League championship. Everybody gets a trophy. Everybody on the team gets a trophy. And kids think, or some kids think, that life isn't supposed to have these challenges, but they experience them and then they feel like a failure,
Yeah.
or they feel like I must be doing something wrong and I can't talk about it. I mean, the
Yes.
book that I so often give and my children got for graduating high school was "Oh, the Things You Can Do" by Dr. Seuss,
Mhm.
because it talks about all of the beautiful stuff and then sometimes they don't, right? It talks about the times that things don't go the way you planned, even though you had lined everything up. Like, there's the job you're not going to get. How do
Mhm.
you take that and learn? And it's really hard. It's really hard. Staying in a community that rejects one piece of you or one idea you had of yourself is really hard. And in high school, the kids are trying to figure out, who am I? What is my identity?
Mhm.
And and so that impedes their ability to make decisions because they sometimes want their identity to be the same as their neighbor, as their
Yes.
friend.
Yeah, and I often will talk about that the skill that most people have at the top of the ladder when they graduate high school, that skill is comparison. We are so great at comparison because we've not like been able to identify who we are
Mhm.
without comparing us to somebody else, right? I am the top of the class compared to the 300 other students in my school. I am being compared academically right from the moment I enter ninth grade. And so that skill that becomes our greatest success is comparison, but it's not going to help us be strong in any other area of our
Right.
life.
It's so interesting when you say that. So I have a story, right?
Mhm.
So my son graduated high school and we got like a printout of all the schools that the kids were going to, the kid in the
Yes.
school they got into. So you have a choice. That could just be a celebration that 95% of the kids at this school are going to college, or it could be, oh my gosh, how do I compare to that one? And
Right.
so 2 years later, when my daughter graduated high school, they didn't print out the sheet. They didn't want anyone to feel bad.
Mhm.
And so they didn't print out the sheet. And so they I'm trying to think of, they made the idea that success is dangerous, that
Mm,
success is something you have to be ashamed of. You can't share that I got into my top choice, which for me might be SUNY Binghamton and for someone else might be Harvard.
mhm.
But someone else is putting the judgment on top of that.
Yeah,
And the fact is we're all different. And
we
so
are.
these schools are different, and you can have a wonderful college career at your community college or at Harvard. And you know what? Harvard isn't so much to aspire to these days either, because there's so much wrapped up in academia that is
Yes.
challenging.
Well, and I want to just reflect back a moment ago where you talked about how parents or adults, we don't want kids to feel that discomfort. And I think part of that issue is because it makes us feel uncomfortable
Mhm.
and we're not comfortable being uncomfortable. But there's also this idea that outside of my comfort zone, there's one
Mm,
level, right? There's just challenge, but really there is a level, and many of us have felt it when we bump into that survival mode of the fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. That means you've gone too far out of your comfort zone. So if you know that there are actually three zones, and if you think of three circles on top of one another, the one in the center is your comfort zone, and the one that is the furthest out, that's what I call your panic zone. And in between is your challenge zone. And my favorite thing to do with kids is to put those circles on the ground and ask them to stand where they feel in different situations. And what they realize is, one, they may not be alone out there feeling scared of heights, but two, that they move in and out of all of those zones in different situations, and so does everyone else. And
right,
so it's like this moment of recognition that my experience is, yes, it is so different than your experience, and really, it should be. But again, in that comparison is, if I don't feel the same as you, there must be something wrong with me.
right, right. And that's the messaging that we want our kids to know, that
Right.
leadership is a skill and you're not necessarily born with it. And I
No.
I will take that to my clients and I will share, you now have the opportunity, maybe for the first time, to be the leader of your life,
Mm,
right? You've lived in other people's homes, you've followed other people's tracks. This was not the track you chose, but you can look at this as opportunity to find a new identity and a new leadership for yourself. So it's a big moment, and your talents and what you offer students are a primer for adults as well.
yes. Yes, 100%. And often, like, the things that challenge us the most and feel the hardest is what propels us into things in the future. When we look back, we're like, how did I get here? I mean, I look at myself running this business. How did I get here? I got here because somebody yelled at me based on what a student did. And it's so strange. At the time, I was at rock bottom for myself in terms of like people pleasing. And
Mhm.
I didn't think I could crawl back up. And now I'm providing those skills and those opportunities for kids as young as 12.
It's amazing. It's amazing. So we are about at the end of time, which makes me sad because we have so much more to talk about, because I really want to talk about kids and divorce and
Oh,
leadership.
yes.
And that will be our next podcast.
I love it.
But for now, what would you like to leave our audience with, and how can they get in touch with you?
I would love for your audience to know that decisions are not right or wrong. They are not binary. So any decision you make is somewhere in the spectrum of right and wrong. And usually it's right smack in the middle. So just make that next step. And if you want to follow me, I am on Instagram at Peers Not Fears. And really, that's pretty much, if you search Peers Not Fears, you'll find me.
Great, great. I love that. I really love the title. And
Mhm.
it's taken me a while to really sort of internalize what that means, that we want to be peers and
Yeah.
not be afraid of each other.
Right.
And
Right.
so much of the social structure, especially as intense as it is in high school, is like, who am I least afraid of?
Yes.
That's who I'm going to hang with. And
Yes.
it's challenging. I mean, people find great friends in high school, don't get me
Yes.
wrong, but there is a lot of pressure that exists for our teens. And if we can't teach them how to behave in those environments, then we're missing a lot.
100%. Couldn't have said it better myself.
Oh, thank you, Lorraine. Well, you're such a good teacher. That's why. So, for my audience, thank you so much for listening. You can find me at Lisa at lzlcoaching.com, and you can make an appointment for a 30-minute complimentary consult at lzlcoaching.com. Thanks for showing up, and we'll see you next time.